What's going on, everyone? Welcome to whatever the name of Neil's show is for Monday Night Football, Steelers and the Dolphins, Week 15, I think. Should be a fun one. There's a lot to talk about for this slate. Neil is still, I guess, coming back from New Orleans now, so it's just me on this show. I had considered doing a full just like Neil impression, but wearing glasses was too annoying, so not going that route. Sorry to the person in chat that said I'm just here for all the shots fired at Neil's expense. But it is just me, so no live before lock from Neil again today. It will be back to regularly scheduled stuff from him on this channel on Thursday for Thursday Night Football. But going to go through as usual, just using Run the Sims, talking about tonight's slate. There is some stuff up in the air. There are kind of some interesting things to talk about, I think. If you have questions, as always, feel free to throw them in chat. Going to start at the quarterback position. I built lineups before the show using Run the Sims. I did adjust the ownership again. And if you are a Run the Sims sub, I published it to the site. So if you log in, it's the same ownership you'll have. It still, for whatever reason, doesn't show up over here, which annoys me. But I will try and remember to flip back and forth to this screen so we can see the ownership that I'm working with. But starting at quarterback, you have two kind of similar guys in terms of fantasy where neither of them are going to run at all. I mean, we did see Aaron Rodgers with the rushing touchdown last week, but obviously that's not something that you see very often. They're both reasonably priced, both of them coming in just shy of 10K. So they're not priced for rushing upside or anything like that, obviously. But guys that, I'm not really excited to get to a captain. If you do get to him a captain, obviously you're going to want multiple pass catchers with them. I think I didn't get much, but we can look at the lineups where I do have Aaron Rodgers a captain, Calvin Austin, DK Metcalf, Kenneth Gainwell. Both of the Steelers running backs certainly count as pass catchers. Not both, Devin Achane certainly counts as a pass catcher for Tua as well. Rodgers, Smith, Gainwell. So nothing really surprising there. Like that's normally what you're going to get anyway, but especially when you have a quarterback that just doesn't run at all. With Tua, you can see same thing. A lot of Dolphins mixed in with him. But I don't have too much right now. I projected, or at least the captain, I projected 32% flex ownership to Tua, 3% captain ownership. Don't really think he'll be popular at captain, but he's still a quarterback. He's going to get some ownership at flex. And then kind of similar for Rodgers, but a bit more ownership, 47% at flex for Rodgers. He does project higher of the two. 8% captain ownership is higher as well. For me personally, right now, I got the 39% Rodgers at flex, so slightly below the field. Similar on Tua, I got the 27%, but where I really just wasn't getting to them was at captain. I only got 1% Rodgers. I got 2% Tua. Is what it is. I mean, clearly, if you want to play some Aaron Rodgers at captain or Tua at captain, it's fine. But there's just other spots that I prefer, and there's really just sort of one when it comes to the captain position in particular. I think there's just kind of one overarching decision point that drives a lot, and it's what you're doing with Achane. So I know for me right now, and obviously I'll talk about it more at running back, but for me right now, I have a really big stand on Achane at captain, and essentially what's happening on this slate, and you can see it if you look at projections, is that Achane is just in this tier entirely by himself. And then you have a lot of guys that are really comparable in like a second tier. So what kind of happens? I think slates like this are kind of tricky, but the way that I think is kind of like easiest to think about it, there's a tendency to always be like, oh, well, I'm not going to play, like the most popular captain. But you also need the other part of that equation is always how likely is somebody to be the optimal captain. And in our sims, Achane's coming out at captain 32% of the time as the optimal captain. And so what will happen sometimes is you'll get, let's say, 25% or 30% ownership projected to Achane. And there's like a natural tendency to be like, all right, well, I'm not playing the 30% on captain. I'm going to play Jalen Waddle. I'm going to play DK Metcalf. I'm going to play Aaron Rodgers, etc. And you can actually get a situation where those guys are actually over-owned at captain relative to how likely they are to be optimal, and the 30% owned guy is not. And it sucks from the sense of in large field tournaments, obviously it becomes that much more difficult not to dupe lineups when the captain is 30% owned. But also from the sense of building the lineup that comes in first place, just being 30% owned doesn't mean that you're over owned. So that whole conversation really, I think, dictates what you're doing with a lot of other captains. And for me, given that, at least right now, my stand is HN at captain, it's going to cost me some Aaron Rodgers because he's getting 8% projected captain ownership in what I used, and he's only optimal 6% of the time. Tua, only optimal 3% of the time. So that's the approach I'm taking. But again, if you're gonna just say I don't want the raw ownership, I want to go elsewhere, it'll limit my dupes more, etc. Like I think I'll win more money when it does come through. Then sure, getting to more Rodgers is going to make sense. I do think Rodgers looks better than Tua. He projects a little bit better. We've also seen Miami go extremely run heavy in recent weeks. They've had a pass rate below expectation in 4 straight games, and I think like 6 of their last 7. They've been a lot more run heavy. They've had success. Teams have also been attacking Pittsburgh on the ground more lately. They've been having more success on the ground. Obviously, this is the NFL, so all of that said, they'll probably just come out and throw 60 times. But I do expect a more run heavy game plan from the Dolphins here. I think you see Rodgers throw it a little bit more. So I do prefer him to Tua, but overall, I think they're very similar plays. Travis said, how are your best ball bags looking? I think I'm probably going to advance like 2 on DraftKings, 2 on Underdog. There's a chance, I think, for a third on both sites, but I think it's relatively low. I don't even remember what I have. I know I have like a McBride team advancing. I have a Goddard team advancing. I have a Pitts team advancing. The one that I'm hoping advances tonight on Underdog, I think it's fading like 14.5 Darren Waller points. I really like that one. It's got 5 healthy running backs with ETN, Barkley, Hampton, Jonathan Taylor, and somebody else that isn't bad. And then it's got like decent receivers, 3 quarterbacks, 3 tight ends. Whole team's healthy. So like that one has a little bit of a sweat, but it's one that I really want to advance. But yeah, I don't have anything that I think is like super strong. They're obviously live to win a pod, but yeah, I don't have anything that I'm like super excited about. Moving on to running back. Talked about it a bit with Achane, but you have him at a completely different price point. He's $12,800. He is $2,000 more expensive than Jalen Waddle, who is second in salary, $3,000 more expensive than Aaron Rodgers, and it just goes on from there. So you are paying for it, but this is also a slate where you have, solid mid-range guys. You have the quarterbacks, you have Waddle, you have Metcalf, you have the running backs here, but like Gainwell's not really that expensive. Warren's not really that expensive. I think can make pretty good lineups. You have the Pittsburgh tight ends that you can mix in. Waller's really cheap. So I think you can still make a nice combination of Achane lineups. He is expected to play. He was on the injury report, but expected to go. I'm expecting him to be essentially full strength here. And he just looks really, really good. He's been extremely efficient this year as usual, but I mentioned that, Pittsburgh's run defense has struggled a bit lately. Last 5 weeks, they've been a favorable matchup on the ground for opposing running backs. They've been pretty much neutral for the season, but they are trending in the wrong direction. You don't have TJ Watt. Obviously, that impacts the entire defense as a whole. Good pass rusher, grades out well in run defense. So not having him out there is obviously important. So I think it looks like a really good spot for Achane. You obviously get pass catching upside. He's in essentially all of my lineups right now, and it does just come back to how you're going to approach somebody that is getting as much ownership as he is getting. Have him projected for 43% ownership at flex, 30 at captain. So he's going to be in pretty much everybody's lineups. I'm actually a little below the field, I guess, at flex, but well over it at captain. And I'm fine with that. Obviously it's risky in the sense that it's one player. He can have a bad game. But right now, at least, I just don't think that the ownership projected to come in to Achane is like, I don't think it's too high relative to his chances of being optimal when you compare it to the other positions. Like I said, I have 30% projected captain ownership, 32% chance of being the optimal captain. So even if you think that, the projection's a little bit high on Achane, which compared to some other places in the industry, it is a little bit high, you're still talking about somebody that's probably like 25% to be optimal. So just clearly somebody that is in the winning lineup a ton. As far as the other Miami backs, you got an increased price tag on Jalen Wright at 6,800. I'm not getting him at that price tag. You saw a bunch of work last week because of Achane getting hurt. His rushing prop today is like 17 and a half yards. I don't even know for sure that he's getting run ahead of Ollie Gordon. I think that it's probably kind of just like all three of them playing, but Wright maybe a little bit more than Gordon behind Achane. But at 6,800, like, you need Achane to get hurt during the game, I think. Or you need Achane to be like significantly limited, which, like I said, I'm not expecting. But if you're like, no, he was banged up and now they're going to just play him a lot less, then like, yeah, I guess maybe you could get to some $6,800 Wright. But I think that's really tough. $4,800 Ollie Gordon. I'm getting 8%. I don't have any real expectations there. We've seen, for the most part, his workload cut back in recent weeks. There was a time midway through the season where you were seeing him like creep up and get 30% or so of the rushing market share. That has decreased. I am pulling up now his most recent games. That has decreased, though. Like I said, last week you had Wright ahead of him when Achane got hurt. Last 4 weeks, 12%, 9%, 29%, and 3% rushing market shares for Ollie Gordon. So I don't really have expectations here, but they will use him around the goal line at times. Hopefully, there is some chance that you just get the game where like Jalen Wright DNPs again. So I think that at no ownership, mixing him in is fine. I'm projected for 2% ownership. Sorry, Brendan, I don't know what "is this a good showdown" means, so I haven't answered it. As far as is this a good slate to play high stakes, I generally just play whatever I'm playing, regardless of the slate. If you normally play high stakes, I would play high stakes. If you don't, I wouldn't. Am I expecting Warren to play? Yeah, for right now. He said he is expecting to play. He said he's optimistic. I took a little bit away from him in terms of workload. I do think that's a really volatile spot, and I'll touch on it in a second. But for now, I'm assuming that he plays. On the Pittsburgh side here, so from the Miami side, obviously Achane the priority. I think that mixing in a little bit of Gordon at 4,800 is fine. Not super excited about it. I think it's really tough to get the $6,800 right. On the Pittsburgh side, it becomes really interesting. If you just basically project this straight up the way that they've been playing lately, you would get Jaylen Warren as the lead back, Kenneth Gainwell as a running back 2 that is still heavily involved, and then Caleb Johnson now in the rotation, but not very heavily. He's gotten some garbage time work. But if you take a little bit off of Warren, you can give a little bit more to Gainwell. You can give a little bit more to Caleb Johnson. Gainwell generally runs ahead of Warren in terms of route participation. Warren's still involved, though, runs around 40% routes. Need that said, Wright wasn't all due to Achane getting hurt, according to McDaniel. Yeah, I don't care what Mike McDaniel says ever. I don't. I don't care what most coaches say. I certainly don't care what Mike McDaniel says. For the Pittsburgh running backs, though, you get Gainwell and Warren very heavily involved in the passing game. They get targeted a lot in addition to both running like 40+% of routes. So that makes them look good. So the question here is really, and maybe we'll get reports on it throughout the day, but if Jaylen Warren's in his normal role or anything close to it, he looks really good at 9K on a slate where you don't really have anybody separating other than Achane. I'm getting the 45% at flex, only 4% at captain, again, in part because of how much Achane I'm getting to. I have Warren projected for 35% flex ownership, 10% captain. So that puts me a little bit under at captain, a little bit over at flex. Gainwell getting 39% at flex, 7% at captain. I'm over at captain there, where he's $2,000 less expensive than Warren is. With Gainwell, you get some added upside too, though, where obviously if Warren is limited, we've seen what Gainwell can do in a lot of or we've seen what Gainwell can do when Warren is out or limited or whatever. Like we saw him, I think it was a London game. It was a game in Europe, but we saw the game that Warren was out. Like Gainwell got the full workload. There wasn't really a timeshare between him and Caleb Johnson. So you have a path where, let's say Warren is active, but they do actually limit him, where Gainwell, like this is Gainwell in his normal role, and he looks like a really good play at 7K. Every additional bit of work that he gets because they take a little bit off of Jaylen Warren's plate obviously just makes him look better and better. So there's a lot of uncertainty around Gainwell, but it's all like positive uncertainty, whereas with Warren, it's negative. But obviously that can also skew ownership. People are going to be more inclined to click on Kenneth Gainwell. They'll be less inclined to click on Jaylen Warren. So it really comes down to, what your best guess is at what they're going to do if we don't get a report. If you are using Run the Sims, obviously it's very easy for you to make your own assumptions there. You can see I have right now Warren projected for 50% of the rushing market share. That's a little less than normal, but pretty close. Gainwell getting 28, Johnson getting 12. Normally in a competitive game, Johnson would be closer to like 6, 7, 8. So it is, him cutting in a little bit on Warren. Gainwell, a little bit higher as well. But if you wanted to lower this to say 45, make that like 33, rerun it, see what happens. It's very easy for you to do that and make your own assumptions there. But for me, I like both of the Pittsburgh running backs, assuming we don't get a report that Warren is going to be, super limited or obviously out. If he's out, Gainwell probably becomes the highest owned guy on the slate, I would assume. Caleb Johnson at 2,400 starts to look good as well as the RB2. With Warren in, I'm getting 3% Johnson at 2,400. I don't expect much from him, but he is cheap. So a lot that we're waiting on here with the Steelers running backs. Einsteinium said, could it just be that Caleb Johnson sees whatever work if Warren loses work and Gainwell says the same? Yeah, it could. I think it kind of depends. Like, if it's Warren loses work, as far as like instead of having a 55% market share, it's 50%, then yeah, I think it's relatively likely that you just see like because then you're talking about, like 2 carries or something. Maybe they just give an extra 2 carries to Caleb Johnson. If it's like Jaylen Warren starts the game and then starts throwing up on the sideline and never comes back, then I think Gainwell gets a big bump. So it kind of, I think, depends. And obviously it could be, if Warren loses 2 carries, they just go to Gainwell. But I think it's, the way I see it is basically the more or the less Warren plays. I don't know how to word this. Okay, so like if Warren just loses a little bit, it could just go to Caleb Johnson. If Warren loses a lot or Warren doesn't play, Gainwell is the RB1, is essentially how I see it, I think. Miami said, why did Wright get 24 carries last week? HN got hurt and left the game. Wright was also, to clarify, Wright was also involved, more than he had been earlier in the year. Like we've seen Wright's workload come up recently. 16, 3, 9% rushing market share for Wright in the 3 games prior to last week. But then last week, HN got hurt. Wright took on the lead role ahead of Ollie Gordon. So that's why he had so many carries last week. I expect this week to be in the middle. Like I think he's in the rotation. I think he's playing, but obviously I don't think he's like cutting into a ton of HN's workload. But again, if you disagree, you can make those changes as well. At wide receiver, both these teams have a clear wide receiver one. Actually, I want to take a look at some of the HN captain lineups. I don't think that there's anything that, like, from a theory standpoint, you would really need. You can play him with Tua. Obviously, he catches passes. You have Tua to HN touchdown upside, but like you don't have to play Tua. I think HN is relatively script proof. Like obviously if the game blows out and is just completely uncompetitive, then like they're going to take him off the field. But in the sense of like it's a competitive game, but Miami's playing from behind, you're getting passing volume for HN. If they're playing from ahead, you're getting HN on the ground. So I don't think you really have to worry about that as far as, like, oh, can I play him with 4 or 5 Steelers or anything like that. Here, you have HN captain in a 4-2 Steelers stack. I think that's fine. Here, HN is captain in a 5-1 Miami stack. Also think that is fine. Yeah. Kind of feels like maybe like Tua could be the captain in this lineup, but still like these guys are all cheap enough where like you can get, Waddle scores a touchdown or whatever. Dulcich and Waller just each catch a few passes. Calvin Austin catches a bomb for a touchdown. And then HN has a big game. So yeah, I think this lineup is still fine. So I think, and that's another thing I think, or another reason I think why Achane is getting in so many of my lineups is that one, I think the ownership is either efficient or even a little bit too low. And also, I think there's a lot of ways that you can do it because you're not forced. Like if Achane were a quarterback and I'm going to require two pass catchers in all of these lineups, there's only so many different ways that I can pair my quarterback with two pass catchers before I run out of appealing ways to do it. You can pair Achane with like literally any other player on the slate and it's fine. So I think there's that as well. Miles said, do you think the difference between Rodgers and Tua's projections is legitimate or more marginal? Do you mean the actual, like the point projection or the ownership projection? But yeah, I mean, I think Rodgers should project higher than Tua. I expect the Dolphins to run a bit more, but it's also like it's marginal in the sense of you're talking about, I think it's like 1.5 or so, 1.5, 2 point differentiation in projection. Like when you consider volatility, that's still very close. It's a situation where like Rodgers should get more ownership than Tua based on that, but it shouldn't be something like Rodgers is 60%, Tua's 30. It should probably be in the like 45 to 30 or 45 to 35 range. But yeah, I do think that Rodgers should project higher than Tua does. Aura today is good. Thank you for asking. No Neil to pull it down. He'll be back on Thursday. Moving on to wide receiver. Both teams kind of similar in that you have Jalen Waddle as the clear top guy in Miami. You have DK Metcalf as the clear top guy in Pittsburgh. And then you have a bunch of shit that is just kind of there. For Waddle, he's 10-8. For Metcalf, he is 9,400. So you do get a $1,400 discount on Metcalf, which is pretty nice. He's been targeted he's 0.24 targets per route run, give or take, this season. So he's getting targeted a lot. His yards per reception are still up around 13, 14 yards. There was a period early in the season that it was a little bit concerning because his ADOT was way down, and it was just like, all right, are they going to completely rely on yards after the catch? Are you just going to start getting DK Metcalf 6 catches for 30-yard games? But his yards per reception has been fine throughout the season, so he looks good. Obviously, Jalen Waddle looks good as well. I'm getting the 21% Waddle, getting the 29% Metcalf, a little bit higher ownership projection, I think, coming into Metcalf, 35% to him, 32 to Waddle, so pretty close, and then 12% captain to Waddle, and 10, 11 to Metcalf. So similar ownership to both of them, which I think does make sense. Waddle's a little bit more expensive. He projects about a point better. So kind of like the same thing with Rodgers and Tua. I think Waddle does, I buy into that projection. I don't disagree with it. But in a one-game sample, a 1 fantasy point projection between 2 wide receivers is not a big difference at all. So I think their ownership should be very similar, especially when you factor in that Metcalf is less expensive. I'm getting a little bit more Metcalf probably because he's 1,400 less and I have so much Achane. So the more you're playing Achane at captain, the more you are forced to kind of care about this $1,400 difference, I think. So I have 29% of him. I have 21% Waddle. I have a little bit more Waddle at captain, but I am below the field on both. The projected ownership to them at captain, I think, is fine if you are trying to get away from some of the Achane. I do think these are both very appealing guys to turn some of that into because Metcalf's projected for about 11% captain ownership. He's about 11, 12% to be optimal. Waddle's projected for, I think, 12%. He's 12% to be optimal. So these guys are not going over owned at captain, at least right now. So I do think that if you are trying to just cut down on some of the Achane, those are guys at the top of the list where I would start looking to them at captain a bit more, Metcalf and Waddle. CW said, which Steelers tight end sees the biggest bump if Washington misses? Washington's expected to play, but it would be a combination of Jonnu and Freiermuth if he does miss, but he was cleared from concussion protocol, so he should be good to go. Last week, you ended up with 63% route participation for Freiermuth, 34 for Jonnu. So if I had, they're not sticky from week to week generally, but if I had to guess, Freiermuth probably gets the bigger bump just based on what we saw last week. But I think that Washington's playing anyway. The rest of the wide receivers here, I'll start on the Miami side. Malik Washington, 5,800, just a reasonable price tag with him. Optimal 18% of the time at flex, about 1% of the time at captain. I have him 13% at flex. There's nothing exciting to say there. He's not targeted super frequently, but he is fast. He can make big plays. They'll hand off to him, one or two times probably. Westbrook Akine, 2K. I'm not getting to him. He's not getting any ownership really, like 2%. 2% to be optimal there. Cedric Wilson, 2% to be optimal. D. Eskridge, 1% to be optimal. I do have 3% of him at $200, but there's nothing really about the Miami receivers beyond the Malik Washington that I think is like particularly noteworthy outside of it's a showdown slate and maybe somebody will, catch a long pass. Last week, you had 18% route participation from Cedric Wilson, 5% from D. Eskridge, 32% from Westbrook Akine. So you are expecting Westbrook Akine to run the most routes out of that trio, but he is also slightly more expensive than Cedric Wilson and a lot more expensive than D. Eskridge. Mostly, I just don't want them. But I do think that just throwing a dart at the cheapest one makes some sense. You could argue that it's just a waste because like Eskridge might not even get on the field, but he has at least run 5 and 7% of routes the last 2 weeks. So he's live for your like Kyle Williams, one target for like 10 fantasy point play, I guess. On the Pittsburgh side, you do have the moving piece with Adam Thielen. Einsteinium asked about it, said, how do you feel about Thielen and Calvin Austin? I think like it could go either way. So we saw Adam Thielen run about 31% of routes last week. We got 46 from Calvin Austin. The week before that, Thielen wasn't out there, but it was 56% Calvin Austin, 48% Roman Wilson. And then Wilson was inactive last week. So I think mostly you're getting Thielen like replacing the Roman Wilson route share. So I'm expecting that we just continue to see not the Calvin Austin from earlier in the season, like prior to his injury and even after his injury for a few weeks, Calvin Austin was running like 80+% route participation. They seem to be done with that. From what I can tell, they're not doing that anymore. You're seeing, just a lot of 2 tight end sets. You're seeing now Thielen and previously Wilson involved. But I still think you're looking at 45 to 50% Calvin Austin route participation, and then probably 35, 40% Adam Thielen, something like that. And so I guess I'm not too concerned about Calvin Austin like disappearing any more than he already has. Like I'm just accepting that he's now running routes 50% of the time, give or take. I'm not that worried about it becoming like 20%, unless Roman Wilson were active. If Roman Wilson is active, then you get just a really weird, I would still project it like Calvin Austin where he's at, Adam Thielen as the next guy, and then Roman Wilson to run a few routes. But like if Wilson is active, there is at least that chance that Pittsburgh just completely changes up their rotation. But if we get Wilson inactive again this week, then I feel pretty comfortable that like somebody needs to run routes. So like DK Metcalf is out there on the vast majority, call it 90%. But beyond that, you don't have a second wide receiver that's running like 70, 80, 90% of routes. So Thielen can run a pretty healthy amount of routes, and Austin would still need to be out there. So as long as that's the case, like I'm not super worried about Austin's route participation like completely disappearing. I guess maybe there is some chance that like Adam Thielen this week is Calvin Austin from week 2 and just runs 80% of routes, but it seems not likely with Adam Thielen. So my expectation now is that you kind of have like a split between Austin and Thielen, with Austin on the higher end. I do think that is volatile, but a $600 price difference here between Austin and Thielen. I am getting a lot of Calvin Austin right now. The ownership projection on him that I used was only 7% at flex, none at captain. I got the 35% at flex. That's a bit more than I would want, I think. But at the same time, he's 3,800. He's probably running the second most wide receiver routes on the Steelers. I think he's probably running a similar amount of routes to all of their tight ends, and then running less than Metcalf, but probably running more than Thielen. Not a guarantee there, but like certainly running more than Skowronek and whatever else the Steelers have behind him. So I think that his ownership is just really low. Einsteinium said reasonable to give some of the exposure Austin is getting to Thielen. I believe most will just click Austin, but I think Thielen should have some of that. Yes and no, like absolutely reasonable. Similar prices, similar range of outcomes. The difference right now is that I projected 7% ownership to Austin and 6 to Thielen. And Austin projects, quite a bit better. So I think it kind of depends. If you think Austin's going to be like, make this 15%, make that 4%, then yeah, like that's a time to embrace. I don't know what the Steelers are going to do. Like, yeah, I'll play some Adam Thielen. But if the ownership is going to just be similar, I'm going to play the guy that I think projects better in Calvin Austin. So that is definitely a spot that I want to pay a lot of attention to ownership because I do think there's volatility there, but I do also think that Calvin Austin still has the advantage and projects, a little bit better. Behind them, Bed Skoranek, $1,000, getting 1% ownership. I don't have him. Scotty Miller, $800. Don't have him. Actually needed to check. Somebody mentioned MVS in chat. I hadn't seen if I guess we won't know till later. I haven't seen anything about him getting elevated, but I'm double checking Twitter now. Or actually, I can just double check. Yeah, he's not showing up in my sheet as being elevated yet, but maybe he will be. Tight end is an absolute mess, but it's got a lot of appealing plays, a lot of guys to get to. It's a mess in the sense of good luck guessing which of these guys does well. But it does have a lot of just appealing targets that I think you're going to want to mix into lineups. You have the 3-man rotation with Pittsburgh, and then with Miami, you basically have a 2-man, but Waller being ahead of Dulcich being a lot cheaper though. So one thing that I think is interesting with Pittsburgh is there is a chance, and it's not necessarily like a super high chance because we've seen, like I said earlier, it hasn't been sticky all year. We've seen, 1 week Freiermuth runs 60% of routes, then the next week Washington runs 65%, etc. But it does seem like there's a chance, at least, that Darnell Washington is really stepping up and overtaking this role. If you look at route participation for the last few games, going back to 4 games ago, Washington ran the most routes at 61%. Then Washington runs the fewest routes at 40%. Then he runs the most routes by a lot at 80%. And then last week, he only ran 29% of routes, but he got hurt in the second quarter. Prior to that, he was leading all the tight ends in routes again. So if you just go up to the point of injury last game, Darnell Washington has led their tight end trio in route participation in 3 of the last 4 games. No idea if that carries over. I am projecting it to be, a pretty even split between them just because that's what we see on average. But Darnell Washington is also the most heavily targeted of the group, so he does have that working for him. Now, if you want to get more into like the actual matchup and who does well from a tight end standpoint against Miami, then it actually hurts Washington a bit. If you look at fantasy production for tight ends against Miami this season, it's been a good matchup overall. It's been a very good matchup for tight ends that are split out. It hasn't been an above average matchup. It's been basically neutral. So it's not like it's been bad, but it's been a neutral matchup for tight ends running routes in line. It's been a favorable one for tight ends running routes split outside. Darnell Washington's run 63% of his routes in line this season. He's run 63% of his routes in line this season. You've had Freiermuth and Jonnu running most of theirs either in the slot or split out wide. So that would give them the edge. But overall, Washington does get the most targets. He does project the best. He's getting the most ownership as well. I think it's a perfectly reasonable spot to just be flat between them because there is so much volatility. Like even if you do get like Darnell Washington running the most routes, there's still obviously just a bunch of variance in terms of how many passes does he catch, etc. But he is my favorite of the group. He's in 25% of my lineups. He's also only 2,600, so that's a nice price tag. Slightly less expensive even than Freiermuth and Jonnu. But I do think you'll also get a bit more ownership to Washington than those guys. I'm pretty much in line with the field on Freiermuth and Jonnu. Had them both projected around like 15, 16% ownership. 12 on Jonnu, 16, 17 on Freiermuth. So pretty much in line with the field on these ownership numbers on the Pittsburgh tight ends. On the Miami side, Dulcich and Waller, the two that you need to pay attention to. $4,400 price tag on Waller, getting about 25% ownership at flex, 4% at captain. Dulcich, $1,600, getting about 19% at flex, none at captain. Last week for Miami, you had Waller at, where'd it go? 59% route participation. He was 69% in his first game back. Dulcich was at 59%. So they ran the same number of routes last week. Julian Hill lost out. Julian Hill in Waller's first game back ran 21% of routes, dropped to 9 last week. Dulcich went from 34% to 59%. Waller went from 69 to 59. I think it's likely that you're getting somewhere around, call it like 50% route participation for Dulcich, and then 60, 65 for Waller, probably 15-ish for Julian Hill. So it makes Julian Hill the clear tight end 3. Not getting any ownership. He's $1,400. He's $200 less than Dulcich. You can, if you're playing him, it's that like typical backup tight end where you're hoping he catches a touchdown at $1,400. I'm not getting to him. But for Dulcich and Waller, they do both look like good values. I'm getting to 28% on Dulcich. I am a little lower than the field on Waller, only getting to 16%. Price tag is a little elevated, but I think it's still certainly reasonable. We've seen Tua use him quite a bit in the red zone when he's been healthy. So clearly live for touchdowns. But mostly I like getting to the tight ends here, in particular Washington, Waller, Dulcich, Freiermuth, and Jonnu. $600 Connor Hayward in 5% of my lineups. I know Neil's mentioned it before, but seems like every Showdown slate you somehow get a Connor Hayward touchdown. I don't know if that is actually factual or not, but it certainly feels like it. Steven said anything on Jonnu coming from Miami. If you want to play a revenge narrative, go for it. Okay, so I missed MVS getting added to the active roster. That's not showing up in my stuff for some reason. But I will add that, so appreciate that. But yeah, as far as like the Jonnu Miami stuff, I mean, if you want to like bump his routes or something because he's facing his former team, go for it. That's not the approach that I would take. As far as lineups with tight ends, I want to see what I'm getting as far as like double tight end from Pittsburgh. I think it's fine because you do just expect them to run so much 2 tight end, be on the field so much. So yeah, I have a lot of like Washington Freiermuth, Washington Jonnu. Oh, I guess I need to click this. Okay, I have a few Washington Jonnu, handful of Washington Freiermuth. So yeah, not going like too crazy with it, but certainly getting lineups with these guys. On the other side, Dulcich and Waller. Yeah, some lineups with them. They run enough routes that, and they're cheap enough that I don't have any problem playing them together. They can very easily get there in the same game, especially on a slate where like you don't have a ton of guys that project really, really well. So yeah, I think that you just because they're listed at the same position doesn't mean that you can't play these guys together. As far as the rest, kickers and defenses, obviously not going to have any super strong takes there. Do keep in mind TJ Watt out for Pittsburgh, obviously just bad for their defense in general. But from a DFS standpoint, you're still playing a statue in Tua, so you do get some stack upside there. Very flat ownerships for me. I have 23% Pittsburgh, I have 24% Miami, 1% apiece at captain. I think that they are very similar. That actually puts me a little bit over the field on Miami and then right around the field on Pittsburgh. I don't mind being over the field on $3,600 Miami. There's not a lot of value plays that I really like on this slate. Aaron Rodgers, is not a mobile quarterback. He is certainly somebody that you could get to. So I don't mind it. Like, I don't love it, but I understand why it's showing up. I think 14% just kind of seems a little bit low. Their optimal rate is 19%. So yeah, 14% seems a little bit low at flex. Pittsburgh is showing up as the optimal defense more often than Miami. And then for the kickers, 23% Boswell. I'm not getting to Riley Patterson. 21% chance of being optimal for Boswell. 15 for Patterson. Ownership right now on Patterson at 26%. So it's purely an ownership thing. It's not that like Boswell is way better than Patterson or anything like that. It's just that they're getting similar ownership. Boswell does project a little bit better. And I think Patterson's going a bit overowned. Take a look at stack types in some of my lineups. Looks pretty varied there. 4-2, 3-3, 4-2, 5-1, 5-1 the other way. So nothing that really stands out there as far as like aggressively targeting one side or the other. TJ Watt, the one who causes massive splits for Pitt defense when he's out. I'm not sure like what the actual splits are, but like, yes, you would expect him to. He is their defense. Who do I think wins the game? You probably don't care, though. I do not care. I assume Pittsburgh, but yeah, do not care. Have not put any thought into it. I don't even know what actually off the top of my head, I don't know the line. I would guess it's like Pittsburgh by 4, 3.5. 3. Pittsburgh by 3. So basically their home field advantage. I'm watching like 10 minutes behind live stream, but I want to say thanks for the aura update, but also I really appreciate the way you discuss game theory and how it might be applied to projections. Appreciate that. It's definitely, I try, but it's also like really difficult sometimes to articulate and also can be really fucking boring. So it's kind of a give or take, but yeah, try to, because I think that's honestly like that's where everybody has good projections now, and understanding sort of the limitations I think is really useful for playing, especially on like a showdown slate where you can actually attack a lot of stuff. Like a main slate, it doesn't matter if Jaylen Warren gets 55% or like, 50% of the rushing market share. But on a showdown slate, if you're going to give an extra 2 carries to Caleb Johnson, that can matter. So yeah, appreciate that. Try to do the best I can with that. But that's everything I have for this one. If nobody has any other questions. Oh, to touch back on earlier, no, I'm not a trust fund kid. I wish I was. That would be sick. Can't imagine how much of a douchebag I'd be if I actually was, but it would be fun. Wouldn't be surprised if Miami wins. I have a feeling their defense will suck massively with Watt out. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I didn't mention it. We were talking about Achane. I like the over on Achane rushing also. His line last I saw was like 82.5 rushing yards. Pittsburgh has been vulnerable on the ground lately. Miami's running more. Achane is really, really good. So I like the over there in addition to just playing him in DFS. But thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, or subscribe to the Run the Sims channel. I don't really care if you subscribe to Neil's, but Run the Sims Live is my channel. So yeah, all that stuff. Sign up for Run the Sims. Use promo code Neil for 50% off your first payment. It says it in the link below. There should be links below on this video. Good luck on your lineup. Somebody wins something, and I'll see you back here with Neil on Thursday.